cruelty often wears the mask of family. When a flawless, ambitious sister whispered a poison-laced insult to a woman whose only crime was having curves and a quiet life, she sealed her own fate. She didn't know the gentle archivist had already caught the eye of the city's most ruthless syndicate leader, a man who didn't just prefer soft curves, but was entirely obsessed with them, and he was already walking up the marble steps, a flawless diamond in his pocket. The Henderson family occupied a very specific, very precarious rung on the Manhattan social ladder. They were wealthy enough to maintain a sprawling apartment on the Upper East Side, but not quite rich enough to ignore the price tags of the designer gowns they bought to keep up appearances. At the center of this desperate balancing act was Vanessa Henderson. At 24, Vanessa was a razor-sharp blonde with a Pilates-sculpted figure and a terrifying ambition to marry into old money. She was the family's golden child, their ticket to the upper echelons of high society. And then there was Chloe. At 26, Chloe Henderson was everything her younger sister was not. Where Vanessa was sharp angles and calculated smiles, Chloe was soft, quiet, and naturally curvy. She had thick, dark chestnut hair that she usually kept pinned up with stray pencils, and a figure that stubbornly refused to conform to the runway model standards her mother constantly pushed. Chloe had long ago stopped trying to diet herself into a shape she wasn't built for choosing, instead to find comfort in her own skin, even if her family made it violently difficult. Chloe worked as a senior restorer at the Archival Arts, an elite dust-moted antiquities shop hidden in the cobblestone labyrinth of Tribeca. She spent her days carefully mending centuries-old leather bindings, removing foxing from fragile parchment, and breathing life back into forgotten history. It was a quiet, meticulous life, and it kept her away from the toxic environment of her family's apartment. But avoiding Vanessa completely was impossible. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 days before the highly anticipated Midsummer Charity Gala at the Pierre Hotel. Vanessa was using the gala as the unofficial launch pad for her engagement to Preston Caldwell, a junior vice president at a massive hedge fund. The Henderson living room was currently a war zone of tulle silk and frantic seamstresses. Chloe had just walked through the front door, the scent of old paper and almond oil clinging to her coat when her mother, Eleanor, intercepted her. "Chloe, finally. Come in here. Your sister needs an opinion on the ivory sash." Eleanor demanded, her eyes immediately darting down to assess Chloe's modest, slightly worn wool skirt. Eleanor sighed a micro-expression of disappointment she had perfected over 2 decades. Chloe stepped into the living room. Vanessa was standing on a velvet pedestal, draped in a stunning, custom-fitted silver gown that clung to her painfully thin frame. She looked at Chloe through the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her blue eyes narrowing. "You look tired, Chloe. Have you been eating those pastries from that bakery near your shop again?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with artificial concern. The 2 seamstresses awkwardly looked away, pretending to adjust a hem. "I had a busy day, Vanessa. The dress looks fine," Chloe said evenly, trying to turn back toward the hallway. "Wait," Vanessa commanded, stepping off the pedestal. She walked over to her older sister, looking her up and down. "What are you wearing to the gala on Friday? Please tell me it's not that dreadful emerald wrap dress from last year. It pulls in all the wrong places." "It's what I have, Vanessa. I'm only going because Mom insisted to make the family look unified," Chloe replied, her cheeks warming. She hated these confrontations. She hated how small they made her feel. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice so the seamstresses wouldn't hear, but making sure her words struck deep. "Look at yourself, Chloe. You're squeezing into clothes meant for someone half your size. It's embarrassing. Preston's partners are going to be there. Real powerful men. And I need everything to be perfect. You need to be realistic." Vanessa reached out, patting Chloe's waist with a mocking sort of pity. "No man wants a chubby girl, Chloe. It's just the harsh truth of the world. Just stay by the catering table on Friday. Keep out of the photographs, please." The words weren't new, but they still carried a venom that burned. Chloe swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears only fueled Vanessa's cruelty. "I'll stay out of your way," Chloe said softly. She turned and walked down the long hallway to her bedroom, shutting the door quietly behind her. She looked at her reflection in the mirror on her closet door. She saw the soft curve of her hips, the fullness of her thighs, the gentle roundness of her stomach. She wasn't unhealthy. In fact, she loved hiking and yoga. But she wasn't a size 0. And in the Henderson household, that was an unforgivable sin. Taking a deep breath, Chloe pushed the hurtful words to the back of her mind. She had a distraction. A highly confidential client had dropped off a severely water-damaged leather journal from the late 19th century that morning. The client's name hadn't been disclosed to her, only to her boss, Mr. Abernathy, who had trembled slightly when handing it over. Chloe needed to get back to the shop to apply the first round of restorative solvent. She changed into her comfortable jeans, pulled on a thick, oversized sweater, and headed back out into the cool New York night, completely unaware that her quiet, hidden world was about to violently collide with the darkest, most powerful undercurrent of the city. The bell above the heavy oak door of the Archival Arts chimed sharply at 8:45 p.m. Chloe was alone in the shop. Mr. Abernathy had left hours ago, giving her the keys to lock up. She was sitting under the warm, concentrated beam of a halo lamp, wearing magnifying glasses, carefully using a micro spatula to lift a fused page of the mysterious leather journal. She paused, looking up. The shop was closed. The sign had been flipped to "closed" over an hour ago. Standing in the entryway were 2 men. The air in the room seemed to immediately drop 10 degrees, entirely swallowed by their presence. The man slightly behind was broad-built like a freight train, wearing a sharp suit that barely contained his muscular frame. But it was the man in front who made Chloe's breath hitch in her chest. He was tall, well over 6'2", with broad shoulders, draped in an immaculate charcoal grey bespoke overcoat. His hair was dark, swept back with an effortless, ruthless elegance. His jawline looked as though it had been chiseled from marble, marred only slightly by a faint silver scar that traced from his left temple down to his cheekbone. But it was his eyes that froze Chloe in place. They were a piercing, stormy obsidian, cold, calculating, and entirely predatory. This was Cassian Romano. Though Chloe didn't know his face, anyone who read the subtle undercurrents of the city knew the Romano name. They owned shipping ports, luxury real estate, and a network of highly lucrative, completely untraceable underground casinos. Cassian was the newly ascended head of the family, a man who had violently stabilized a fractured syndicate over the past 3 years. He was not a man who walked into antique shops on a Tuesday night. Cassian's dark eyes locked onto Chloe. He didn't say a word as he slowly walked through the maze of antique globes and mahogany bookshelves, his heavy footsteps silent on the Persian rugs. His lieutenant stayed by the door, locking the deadbolt with a quiet click. Can I help you?" Chloe asked, her voice miraculously steady despite the sudden spike in her heart rate. She slipped her magnifying glasses off her nose. "The shop is technically closed." Cassian stopped at the edge of her work table. Up close, he smelled of cedarwood expensive tobacco and something inherently dangerous. He looked down at the table, his gaze falling on the leather journal. "I see my family's property is in capable hands," Cassian said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down Chloe's spine. It wasn't loud, but it demanded absolute, immediate obedience. Chloe blinked, looking from him to the journal. "This is yours. Mr. Abernathy didn't give me a name. Abernathy is a coward, but he knows who to hire." Cassian noted his eyes drifting from the book to Chloe. He didn't just glance at her. He studied her. He took in the messy bun, the stray curl resting against her neck, the oversized sweater that couldn't quite hide the generous curves of her chest and hips. In a world filled with hollow, starving socialites who starved themselves for attention, Cassian found himself entirely arrested by the woman sitting in front of him. There was a grounded, earthy warmth to her. She looked real. She looked soft. "It's a 19th century shipping ledger." Chloe found herself explaining, slipping back into her professional element to shield her nerves. "The water damage is extensive, likely seawater from the salt crystallization I found on the spine. It caused the vellum pages to fuse. I'm applying a specialized humectant to gently separate them without tearing the ink." Cassian leaned in slightly. "And how long will that take, Miss Henderson? Chloe Henderson," she replied, leaning back instinctively as his proximity flooded her senses. "It requires patience, at least another 3 weeks of careful separation." "Chloe," he repeated. The way her name sounded on his tongue felt terrifyingly intimate. "My grandfather wrote that ledger. It holds sentimental value. I prefer to oversee its progress." Cassian reached out. Chloe thought he was reaching for the book, but instead, his large hand knuckles dusted with faint scars and a heavy gold signet ring on his index finger moved toward her face. She froze. His thumb gently brushed against her jawline. The touch was startlingly soft for a man who looked like he could snap a neck without breaking a sweat. "You have gold leaf on your cheek, Chloe," he murmured, pulling his hand back to show a tiny fleck of gold dust on his thumb. Her face flushed a deep crimson. "Thank you. I was working on an illuminated manuscript earlier." Cassian's eyes darkened, tracing the flush on her cheeks. He felt an entirely unfamiliar, heavy possessiveness settle deep in his chest. He had come here merely to ensure Abernathy hadn't pawned the ledger off on an amateur. He hadn't expected to find a woman who looked like a Renaissance painting hidden in the dust. "Will I see you at the Abernathy Gala this Friday?" "Chloe," Cassian asked, straightening his posture, "I am a major benefactor of this establishment." Chloe looked down the memory of Vanessa's cruel words from an hour ago, echoing loudly in her head. "No man wants a chubby girl. Just stay by the catering table." "I'll be there," Chloe said quietly, her voice losing its previous confidence. "But I usually stay out of the way. I prefer the background." Cassian's jaw tightened. He possessed an apex predator's ability to read micro-expressions. He saw the sudden shame, the shadow that crossed her beautiful face. Someone had put it there. "The background," Cassian said softly, leaning over the table until he was inches from her face, "is no place for a masterpiece. Good night, Chloe." He turned and walked out of the shop, the heavy oak door shutting behind him. Chloe sat frozen for 10 full minutes, the lingering scent of cedarwood, the only proof that the city's most dangerous man had been there at all. Outside, in the back of an armored Maybach, Cassian Romano poured himself a measure of bourbon. His lieutenant Dante sat in the front passenger seat. "Dante," Cassian said, staring out the tinted window at the glowing facade of the antique shop. "Yes, boss. Find out everything there is to know about Chloe Henderson. Family debts, enemies. Have a full dossier on my desk by morning." Cassian took a sip of the amber liquid. "And contact the jewelers in Antwerp." I need something exceptional pulled from the vault, something that makes a statement. The Pierre Hotel ballroom was a blinding spectacle of crystal chandeliers cascading white orchids, and the city's elite attempting to outshine one another. The Abernathy Gala was technically a fundraiser for historical preservation, but tonight it was the Vanessa Henderson show. Vanessa looked ethereal in her silver custom gown, holding court near the grand staircase, with Preston Caldwell at her side. Preston, a man whose tailored tuxedo couldn't quite hide his weak chin and nervous disposition, was happily playing the role of the adoring fiancé. Surrounding them was a flock of socialites and hedge fund managers laughing entirely too loudly at Preston's jokes. Across the sprawling ballroom, hiding in the literal shadows near the towering ice sculpture and the champagne station, stood Chloe. She wore the emerald wrap dress. It was a beautiful deep green velvet that brought out the warmth of her eyes, but it was 3 years old and clung to her hips and thighs tighter than it used to. She felt painfully exposed, hyper-aware of every curve, every soft edge of her body. She had spent the last 2 hours trying to remain invisible, fetching drinks for her mother, and watching Vanessa bask in the adoration of her peers. Chloe's mind kept drifting back to Tuesday night, to Cassian Romano, to the way he had looked at her as if she were something infinitely valuable. She hadn't seen him yet tonight. A part of her was relieved. She didn't want him to see her like this, hiding in the corner like an unwanted stray. But a deeper secret part of her ached with disappointment. Chloe! Chloe jumped, pulling herself out of her thoughts. Vanessa was standing in front of her, holding an empty champagne flute, Preston hovering 2 steps behind her, with his affluent friends. Vanessa's smile was painfully tight. She had had 3 glasses of champagne, and the alcohol had dissolved whatever thin veneer of politeness she normally maintained in public. "What are you doing over here?" Vanessa asked loudly, ensuring the group behind her could hear. "Just getting some air. It's crowded in the center," Chloe replied evenly, refusing to shrink. "Well, it wouldn't be so crowded if you didn't take up so much space." Vanessa laughed. It was a vicious, calculated sound. 2 of the socialites behind Preston giggled into their glasses. Preston shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Chloe felt the color drain from her face. The cruelty was so sudden, so public. "Vanessa, please don't." "Don't what?" "Tell the truth." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice dropping into a harsh hiss, but still loud enough for her audience. "I told you to stay out of sight. You look ridiculous in that dress. You look like a stuffed sausage, Chloe. I'm trying to make a good impression tonight, with Preston's partners, and you standing here looking like... This is an embarrassment to the family." Vanessa. Eleanor Henderson. Their mother appeared from the crowd looking panicked, but she didn't reprimand Vanessa. Instead, she looked at Chloe. "Chloe, please just go wait in the coat check area. You're upsetting your sister on her big night." Chloe felt a burning, humiliating sting behind her eyes. Her own mother. She looked at the circle of people staring at her, Vanessa's smug superiority. Preston's pity, the stranger's amusement. "You're right," Vanessa said, turning back to her friends with a triumphant smirk. "Like I told her the other day. No man wants a chubby girl. It's just sad, really." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Chloe closed her eyes. The urge to run, to flee out into the cold New York air and never come back was overwhelming. She took a step backward, preparing to disappear just as Vanessa wanted. But the universe, or perhaps the devil himself, had a different plan. At that exact moment, the heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance of the ballroom were thrust open with such violent force that they slammed against the walls with a crack like a gunshot. The string quartet in the corner abruptly faltered, the music dying into a tense silence. The low murmur of hundreds of conversations evaporated. Every head in the ballroom turned. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 4 massive men in dark suits, was Cassian Romano. He was dressed in a jet-black tuxedo, tailored to lethal perfection, a stark contrast to the sea of traditional penguin suits in the room. His presence was a localized weather event, dark, oppressive, and utterly magnetic. He surveyed the silent room, his obsidian eyes scanning the crowd with a cold detachment until they locked onto the emerald green velvet in the corner. His jaw tightened. He saw the tears shining in Chloe's eyes. He saw the tight circle of people surrounding her. He saw the smug look on the blonde sister's face. Cassian began to walk. The crowd parted for him, as if he were parting the Red Sea. No one breathed. Preston Caldwell suddenly went pale, recognizing the man walking toward them. Finance guys knew who held the real power in the city. Oh my God, is that Cassian Romano? Vanessa whispered to Preston, her vanity instantly overriding her cruelty. She quickly fluffed her hair, straightening her posture, preparing to be noticed. She was, after all, the most beautiful woman in the room. Cassian stopped 3 feet from their circle. The sheer physical size of him up close was intimidating. The dangerous aura radiating from him made the air feel thin. Vanessa stepped forward, blocking Chloe entirely, putting on her most dazzling, flirtatious smile. Mr. Romano, what an absolute honor. I'm Vanessa Henderson tonight is actually a celebration of my boar. Move. The word was spoken softly, but it cracked like a whip. Cassian didn't even look at Vanessa. He didn't acknowledge her existence. He was staring directly over her shoulder at the woman in the emerald dress. Vanessa blinked, her smile freezing. I'm sorry. Dante, stepping out from behind Cassian, simply reached out and shoved Preston Caldwell and Vanessa aside, with one heavy hand clearing the path. Vanessa stumbled in her stilettos, gasping in shock, as the golden child was physically brushed aside like trash. Cassian stepped forward, closing the distance between him and Chloe. The rest of the room ceased to exist. He looked down at her, his dark eyes softening a fraction, absorbing the sight of her curves, hugged by the velvet, the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the unshed tear clinging to her lashes. "I told you," Cassian said, his deep voice carrying in the dead silent ballroom. "The background is no place for a masterpiece." Chloe stared up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought it might break them. "Cassian," she breathed entirely, forgetting the formalities. Cassian reached up his rough, scarred thumb, wiping the single tear from her cheek. The intimacy of the gesture in front of Manhattan's elite sent a shock wave through the room. Vanessa, recovering her balance, was staring with her mouth open, her face purple with shock and rage. "Who made you cry, Mia Luce?" Cassian asked. The Italian endearment, my light slipped out naturally, a low, deadly rumble. He slowly turned his head, his gaze landing on Vanessa and Preston. The look in his eyes was so terrifyingly devoid of mercy that Preston actually took a step backward behind his fiancée. "Cassian, don't. It doesn't matter," Chloe said softly, reaching out and gently touching his forearm. The muscle beneath the black fabric was coiled like steel wire. He looked back at her, the anger in his eyes receding slightly under her touch. "Everything about you matters, Chloe." He stepped back slightly, allowing the entire room a clear view. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. The silence in the ballroom became heavy, expectant. Cassian pulled out a black velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee, a king bows to no one, but he opened the box and held it out to her. Gasps echoed through the room. Sitting against the black velvet was a diamond of impossible proportions. It was a 10-carat emerald-cut diamond, flanked by tapered baguettes, set in heavy platinum. It was an antique, a piece of syndicate royalty worth more than the entire gala's fundraising goal combined. It caught the light of the chandeliers, blinding in its brilliance. Vanessa let out a strangled, breathless sound. That's impossible," she whispered in horror. "Chloe Henderson." Cassian's voice rang out authoritative, unyielding, making a public claim that bound her to the most powerful family in the state. "You are coming with me, and you are wearing this ring so that every soul in this city knows exactly who you belong to. Let them see what perfection looks like." He took her left hand. Her fingers were trembling. He slid the heavy cold platinum onto her ring finger. It was a perfect fit. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. His eyes locked on hers. "Let's leave this trash behind," he murmured. The descent down the grand staircase of the Pierre Hotel was a blur of flashing camera phones and stunned whispers. Chloe felt entirely detached from her physical body, floating in a surreal bubble of adrenaline and the intoxicating scent of Cassian's cedarwood cologne. He kept her hand tucked firmly into the crook of his arm, his grip an anchor in the chaotic storm he had just conjured. Outside, the humid New York air hit them carrying the distant wail of a siren. Dante had the door of the armored Maybach open and waiting. Cassian handed Chloe into the plush leather interior with a surprising gentleness before sliding in beside her. The heavy door closed with a muted thud, instantly cutting off the noise of the city. As the car glided effortlessly onto the FDR drive, the streetlights cast rhythmic shadows across Cassian's sharp features. Chloe looked down at her left hand. The 10-carat diamond rested heavy against her skin, catching the amber light of the street lamps. It felt like a chain, yet oddly, it felt like a shield. "You didn't have to do that," Chloe whispered, her voice barely carrying over the low hum of the engine. She finally looked up, meeting his dark, unreadable eyes. "You humiliated them. They will never forgive me for this." Cassian shifted closer, his large frame making the spacious back seat feel instantly intimate. He reached out his warm fingers, wrapping around her trembling hand. "They do not have the right to forgive you, Chloe. They are beneath you. You are a restorer of priceless things. You should know your own value better than anyone." "It's not real," she said softly, staring at the ring. This is a performance, a statement. I don't belong in your world, Mr. Romano." "Cassian," he corrected smoothly. "And as for this not being real," he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a slim black leather folder. He placed it on her lap. "Open it." Chloe hesitated before flipping the folder open. Inside was a dense, highly detailed dossier compiled by Dante's intelligence network in less than 72 hours. Her eyes scanned the documents, her heart sinking like a stone. The Henderson family dossier findings. Eleanor Henderson, mother carrying a severe, heavily compounded gambling debt of $850,000 at the Borgata Hotel Casino and Spa in Atlantic City, leveraging the family's Upper East Side apartment as collateral. Vanessa Henderson's sister maxed out 5 separate platinum credit cards in the last 6 months to maintain social appearances totaling $142,000 in high-interest debt. Preston Caldwell, fiancé. His hedge fund, Caldwell and Hughes, is currently under secret investigation by the SEC for wire fraud. More dangerously, he has been laundering money for the Falcone crime syndicate, Cassian's direct violent rivals in the Brooklyn territory, and he recently misplaced $2.5 million of their capital. "They are drowning, Chloe." Cassian stated, his voice devoid of pity. "Your sister is marrying a dead man, walking just to maintain an illusion. Your mother is about to lose the roof over her head to loan sharks. They use you as a punching bag because you are the only real grounded thing in their hollow lives. Chloe stared at the papers, a cold sickness pooling in her stomach. Preston is stealing from the Mafia, the Falcones. He is an idiot in a very expensive suit, Cassian confirmed, taking the folder from her lap and tossing it onto the opposite seat. But that is no longer your concern. By putting that ring on your finger tonight, I did not just make a statement. I granted you absolute immunity. The Falcones will not touch you, and your family's creditors will suddenly find themselves very forgiving. Chloe felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from Vanessa's cruelty. It was the crushing weight of reality. Why would you do this for a woman you just met in a dusty bookshop? Cassian lifted his hand, his thumb catching the tear on her cheek. His obsidian eyes dropped to her lips, then swept down over the soft curves hidden beneath the velvet dress. Because you are breathtaking, Chloe. You are soft in a world that is painfully hard. I protect what I value. And from the moment I saw you under that halo lamp, I valued you above everything else in this wretched city. 3 days later, Chloe's reality had been entirely rewritten. She had not returned to the Upper East Side apartment. Cassian had simply sent Dante and a crew to pack her belongings and move them to his sprawling multi-level penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. The apartment was a fortress in the sky, all floor-to-ceiling glass, dark Italian leather, and brushed steel, offering a panoramic, godlike view of Manhattan. Despite the sheer opulence of her new surroundings, Chloe stubbornly refused to become a kept woman. Much to Cassian's frustrated amusement, she insisted on returning to the archival arts on Monday morning. He agreed under the strict condition that a black SUV with 2 armed guards remained parked outside the shop at all times. It was Tuesday afternoon when the chime above the antique shop door rang. Chloe looked up from her workbench expecting a delivery. Instead, standing in the doorway looking frantic and disheveled, was Vanessa. The transformation was shocking. The golden girl of the Pierre was gone. Vanessa's designer silk blouse was wrinkled, her blonde hair lacked its usual perfect blowout, and her eyes were rimmed with red. She looked wildly out of place amidst the ancient globes and leather-bound books. Vanessa. Chloe stood up, setting her tools down. She instinctively touched the heavy platinum ring on her left hand, turning the diamond inward. You have to help me, Chloe. Please! Vanessa choked out, her voice cracking as she rushed toward the workbench. She completely ignored the priceless artifacts around her. Preston's bank accounts are frozen. The SEC raided his office this morning. And there are men following us. Chloe remained calm. The dossier in Cassian's car had prepared her for this. I know about the SEC, Vanessa, and I know about the Falcone syndicate. Vanessa froze, her eyes widening in pure horror. How do you know that? Cassian told me, Chloe said softly. You built a house of cards, Vanessa, and you expected me to stand in the corner while you did it. You don't understand. Vanessa snapped a flash of her old venom, returning before desperation swallowed it again. She slammed her hands down on the edge of the workbench. Preston owes them money, real dangerous people. And Mum's creditors called this morning. They're foreclosing on the apartment by Friday if we don't pay. To emphasize the severity, Chloe pulled a piece of scratch paper and jotted down the brutal reality of their situation, sliding it across the table. Vanessa stared at the numbers, her face draining of color. You have to ask him, she pleaded, pointing a shaking finger at the ring on Chloe's hand. Cassian Romano has billions. He could wipe this away with a single phone call. You're sleeping with him, aren't you? Use it. Make him fix this. Chloe felt a cold, hard knot form in her chest. Even now, facing total ruin, Vanessa only saw her as a tool, a means to an end. I am not sleeping with him for money, Vanessa, and I am not going to ask him to bail out Preston for stealing from the mob, Chloe said firmly, her voice steady and resonant. She stood taller, fully embracing the space she occupied. For 26 years you made me feel like I was worthless because I didn't fit into your sample-sized dresses. You told me no man would ever want me. Now the most powerful man in New York has claimed me, and you want me to leverage that to save the fiancé you paraded around, to humiliate me. You're my sister. Vanessa screamed, tears finally spilling over her mascara. We're family. Family doesn't tell you to hide by the catering table, Chloe replied coldly. I'll speak to Cassian about Mum's apartment. She is still my mother. But you and Preston, you made your choices. Before Vanessa could launch into another hysterical plea, the bell chimed again. The atmosphere in the room instantly turned to ice. It wasn't Cassian, it wasn't Dante. It was a man in a sharp, blood-red suit with slicked-back grey hair and a scar that cut cleanly through his upper lip. Two massive enforcers flanked him, their hands casually resting inside their jackets. The guards Cassian had stationed outside were nowhere to be seen. Well, well, the man purred his eyes, bypassing Vanessa entirely and locking on to Chloe. He noticed the heavy platinum ring immediately. Matteo Falcone sends his regards. It seems Mr. Romano has found himself a very pretty, very soft new weakness. The man in the red suit stepped fully into the archival arts, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him with a terrifying finality. He moved with the slow, predatory confidence of a man who was accustomed to violence. He reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a silver lighter, and sparked it, holding the flame to a thin cigar. I am Victor, the man said, exhaling a cloud of grey smoke that immediately tainted the smell of old paper and almond oil. And you, Miss Henderson, are exactly what we need to get Mr. Romano to the negotiating table. The Falcone family has lost a significant amount of capital, thanks to your sister's cowardly fiancé, Preston. Since Preston has proven useless, we need leverage. Vanessa let out a high-pitched, strangled sob, backing away until she hit a bookshelf. I have nothing to do with Preston's business, she shrieked, her self-preservation instinct obliterating any familial loyalty. Take her, Cassian Romano will give you whatever you want for her. Just let me go. Chloe didn't even look at her sister. The betrayal stung, but it was entirely expected. Instead, she kept her eyes locked on Victor, her hand resting over her stomach in a protective, grounding gesture. She forced her breathing to steady channeling the quiet focus she used when repairing a fractured spine on a delicate manuscript. Cassian's men are stationed outside. Chloe said, her voice remarkably level. She recognized the lie as a necessary shield. If you try to take me, you won't make it to the end of the block. Victor smiled, a cold, jagged expression. Your guards, the two gorillas in the black SUV, they were quite easily distracted by a situation in the alleyway. We have about 3 minutes before they realize they've been chasing a ghost. Grab her. He gestured to the two enforcers flanking him. They moved forward, their sheer mass eclipsing the warm glow of the halo lamps. Chloe took a step back, grabbing the heavy iron-handled microspatula from her desk. It was a pathetic weapon against armed mafia enforcers, but she would not go quietly. Don't touch me, she warned. But before the closest enforcer could lay a hand on her, the front window of the archival arts, a thick pane of reinforced historic glass, shattered with a deafening explosive crash. Vanessa screamed, diving to the floor, covering her head, as thousands of glass shards rained down over the Persian rugs and antique globes. Through the shattered frame stepped Cassian Romano. He didn't look like the billionaire CEO who frequented charity galas. He looked like the devil himself. His dark overcoat flared around him, and in his right hand he held a silenced tactical pistol. The expression on his face was one of absolute Arctic fury. He didn't hesitate. Thwip, thwip. 2 muffled shots rang out. The enforcer reaching for Chloe dropped instantly, clutching his shattered kneecap, howling in agony. The second enforcer reached for his shoulder holster, but Dante, vaulting through the window right behind Cassian, slammed the butt of his weapon into the man's temple, knocking him unconscious before his gun even cleared the leather. Victor froze, the cigar falling from his lips, burning a hole into a 19th century rug. He slowly raised his hands, his arrogant smirk entirely vanished, replaced by the pale sheen of true terror. Cassian walked past the groaning men on the floor, his obsidian eyes never leaving Victor. He stopped directly in front of the Falcone lieutenant, the barrel of his pistol pressing coldly against the center of Victor's forehead. "You have made a catastrophic miscalculation, Victor." Cassian murmured, his voice a low, lethal vibration in the ruined shop. Did Matteo Falcone truly believe I would leave my most prized possession, guarded by only 2 men? The men in the alley were bait. You walked into a cage of my design. Romano. Victor stammered, a bead of sweat tracing down his scarred lip. The commission, the 5 families have rules. You can't start a war over a woman. I am the commission, Cassian corrected softly. And she is not just a woman. She is my future wife. You breathed the same air as her, Victor. That is an offense I cannot forgive. Cassian didn't pull the trigger. He simply stepped back and nodded to Dante. Take him to the harbor warehouses. I will deal with him personally tonight. Make sure the Falcone family receives his left hand in a box by morning. They need to understand the new borders of this city. Dante grabbed Victor by the collar of his red suit, dragging him out through the shattered window toward the waiting, unmarked vehicles that had silently swarmed the street. Cassian turned, holstering his weapon. The lethal, cold predator vanished the moment his eyes landed on Chloe. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, pulling her against his chest. His large hands cupped her face, his thumbs frantically mapping her features to ensure she was unharmed. "Did they touch you?" he demanded, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly close to fear. "Chloe, tell me, did they touch you?" "No." She breathed, burying her face into his chest, inhaling the scent of cedarwood gunpowder. And him. Her hands gripped the lapels of his coat. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her legs weak, but his massive frame held her up entirely. "You were right on time." Cassian closed his eyes, resting his chin on the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I will never let you be put in danger again. I swear it on my life, Mia Luce." From the floor, a whimpering sound broke the intimacy. Vanessa was crawling out from under a mahogany display table, covered in dust and glass dust, her designer blouse torn. She looked at Cassian, her eyes wide, with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. Cassian's gaze shifted to Vanessa. The warmth instantly drained from his eyes, replaced by a disgusted, hardened glare. "Cassian, Mr. Romano." Vanessa sobbed, trying to stand her hands shaking violently. "Please, you have to help me. Preston is going to be killed. My mother—" "Quiet," Cassian commanded. The word was a physical blow, silencing Vanessa instantly. He kept one arm securely around Chloe's waist, anchoring her to him. "I know exactly what you tried to do, Vanessa. I heard you offer your sister to the Falcones to save your own pathetic skin." Vanessa's face turned paper white. I was panicking. They had guns." "You are a parasite," Cassian stated coldly. "You have spent your entire life feeding off the warmth and strength of a woman who is infinitely superior to you in every conceivable way. Because you are hollow, you tried to make her feel small. Now let me show you how small you truly are." He pulled out his phone, tapping a single button. The call connected instantly on speaker. "Status on Preston Caldwell." A cold, professional voice echoed from the phone. "Target intercepted at JFK Airport Terminal 4. He was attempting to board a flight to Geneva with 2 million in bearer bonds. We have secured the bonds. The target has been handed over to the FBI tip line for the SEC wire fraud warrants. He is currently in federal custody." Vanessa gasped, covering her mouth. Preston wasn't dead, but he was ruined. He would spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Cassian ended the call and looked back at Vanessa. "Your fiancé is gone. The money he stole has been returned to the Falcones through a proxy settling that debt. They will not hunt him, but the federal government will bury him." And my mother's apartment?" Vanessa asked, her voice a hollow, desperate whisper. "I purchased Eleanor's debt from the Borgata," Cassian said smoothly. "The apartment on the Upper East Side now belongs to my holding company. Your mother has been given a one-way ticket to a modest 2-bedroom condominium in Boca Raton, Florida, which I will pay the maintenance on. She leaves tonight. What about me?" Vanessa asked, tears streaming down her face, finally realizing the absolute totality of her ruin. "You," Cassian sneered slightly, "you are completely cut off. No trust fund, no credit cards, no wealthy fiancé. You will have to do something you have never done in your life, Vanessa. You will have to get a job. Perhaps a catering company is hiring. I hear you enjoy hovering around the buffet tables." He turned away from her, dismissing her existence entirely. He looked down at Chloe, his expression softening, back into absolute devotion. "We are going home, Chloe. Leave this mess behind." Chloe looked at her sister one last time. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, overwhelming sense of closure. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Henderson family expectations had finally shattered. "Goodbye, Vanessa," Chloe said softly. She turned and let Cassian lead her out of the ruined antique shop, stepping over the shattered glass, the 10-carat diamond on her finger, catching the flashing red and blue lights of the approaching, heavily delayed police cruisers. 6 months later, the chilling winds of December whipped through the concrete canyons of Manhattan, but inside the private, hyper-secure dining room of Le Bernardin, the atmosphere was stiflingly tense. This was not a charity gala. This was a sit-down. The heads of the remaining 3 dominant crime families of New York were gathered around a massive circular mahogany table. The Falcone syndicate had been quietly and violently absorbed by the Romanos after Victor's failure, cementing Cassian as the undisputed king of the Eastern Seaboard. Tonight was a formality, a swearing of fealty by the lesser bosses. Cassian sat at the head of the table. He wore a midnight blue bespoke suit, his presence commanding absolute silence from the hardened, dangerous men in the room. But the true shift in power wasn't just Cassian's expanding empire. It was the woman sitting to his immediate right. Chloe Henderson, now Chloe Romano, sat with perfect, relaxed posture. She was dressed in a stunning, custom-tailored burgundy velvet gown that celebrated every curve of her body. Her dark hair was styled in sleek, vintage waves, and around her neck rested a flawless diamond necklace from Graf, a wedding gift that had made international headlines. But it wasn't the diamonds that commanded respect. It was her eyes. They held the same quiet, analytical intelligence that she used to decipher centuries-old texts now applied to reading the dangerous men around her. "The shipping routes through Port Newark remain under our exclusive jurisdiction," Cassian was saying, his voice a low rumble that brokered no argument. Any container moving untaxed will be seized, and the crew will not be seen again. Are we clear, Moretti? An older man with a thick silver beard nodded quickly, avoiding Cassian's gaze. Clear, Don Romano. We respect the new borders. Chloe observed the exchange, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. Over the past 6 months, she hadn't just accepted Cassian's world, she had optimized it. She had retired from the archival arts, but she hadn't stopped working. She had applied her meticulous organizational skills to Cassian's legitimate holding companies, restructuring his real estate portfolio and turning his offshore assets into a fortress of legal armor. She had learned that power, much like a damaged manuscript, required careful binding, strong adhesives, and a terrifying attention to detail. After the dinner concluded, and the rival bosses had kissed Cassian's ring and departed, leaving only Dante guarding the doors, Cassian turned to his wife. The ruthless mafia boss melted away, leaving only a man utterly obsessed. He reached out, tracing the curve of her jawline with a scarred thumb. You were quiet tonight, Mia Luce, bored by the logistics of the docks. Chloe smiled a warm, genuine expression that made Cassian's chest tighten. Not bored, just calculating. Moretti was sweating. He's skimming from the secondary warehouses in Queens. I saw the discrepancies in the ledgers you brought home last week. Cassian chuckled a deep, rich sound. He leaned in and kissed her softly, tasting the cherry gloss on her lips. Remind me never to hide money from you, Mrs. Romano. You are a terrifying woman. I learned from the best, she murmured, resting her hand against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. Speaking of ledgers, Cassian said, pulling back slightly and reaching into his leather briefcase, resting by his chair. He pulled out the water-damaged 19th century journal, the very object that had brought them together. It was no longer a fused, ruined brick. Chloe had spent the first 2 months of their relationship meticulously restoring it in the private, climate-controlled laboratory Cassian had built for her in their penthouse. The leather spine was rehydrated, the vellum pages separated, and the faded ink stabilized. I finally had my translators finish the encrypted sections in the back, Cassian said, handing the book to her. Chloe traced the smooth leather cover, a sense of deep satisfaction washing over her. And what did your grandfather hide in here? Cassian leaned back, a dark, amused glint in his eye. It wasn't just shipping routes. The journal belonged to an associate of Meyer Lansky. It details the original architectural blueprints for the hidden vaults beneath the Havana casinos before the Revolution. My grandfather smuggled it out of Cuba in 1959. There is over $40 million in untraceable gold bullion sitting beneath a crumbling hotel in Havana, untouched for 70 years. Chloe's eyes widened. Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant. You own a map to a forgotten syndicate treasure. We own a map, Cassian corrected, taking her hand and brushing his lips against the 10-carat diamond that matched her wedding band. I thought we could take the yacht down to the Caribbean for our honeymoon next month. A little sunshine, a little treasure hunting. What do you say? Chloe looked at the man who had ripped her out of a life of shadows and placed her on a throne she never knew she wanted. She thought of Vanessa, who she had recently heard was working double shifts, selling perfume at Macy's, desperately trying to pay off a credit card debt. She thought of her mother complaining about the humidity in a small Florida condo. They had worshipped illusions. Chloe had found something real, a love that was fierce, protective, and completely unapologetic. Cassian didn't want her to shrink. He wanted her to conquer. She smiled, her eyes flashing with a newfound, dangerous confidence. I think, Chloe said, closing the historical ledger and looking her husband dead in the eye, I need to buy a few more swimsuits, preferably ones that show off exactly what you paid for. Cassian threw his head back and laughed a rare, joyous sound that echoed off the private dining room walls. He pulled her out of her chair and into his lap, burying his face in her neck completely, at the mercy of the woman who held his dark heart in her soft, capable hands. The chubby girl from the dusty antique shop had not just survived the vicious world of Manhattan's elite. She had inherited the underworld, and she intended to rule it comfortably. The shadows of the city hold secrets, but none are more powerful than a woman who finally realizes her own worth. Chloe and Cassian's story proves that true devotion doesn't ask you to shrink to fit a mold. It builds an empire around the space you take up. If you are captivated by this tale of ruthless revenge, syndicate secrets, and a mafia king who bows only to the woman he loves, don't let the story end here. Like this video, share it with your friends who crave a dark, dramatic romance, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life-inspired storytelling. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Vanessa? Stay tuned for more.